I've told this story so many times that I wonder whether I should tell it again. But I'm going to, because it's a really relevant story and a very poignant story, a very powerful story with a great and a real message. I grew up on Crown Street between Schenectady and Troy. A handful of houses away from us lived a family called Altschuler. And we didn't really socialize with them. Mr. Altschuler was a very old man when I knew him, and he had two sons who were in their 50s or 60s. One of them was not well. And the other we never saw except on the street. He had a ponytail, I remember. And he was always washing his car. I only realized as an adult that he had been washing his car on Shabbos, specifically. He would double park his car on Crown Street or park it in the alley and wash his car. And my father told me that he was actually doing it to spite us, to get us upset. And unfortunately, we didn't associate with him to be spited by his washing his car on Shabbos. And his father told my father, a very powerful story. That when the Frierdiker Rebbe visited America in 1929, 1930, this same young man was a young bocher, a teenager, and he was a malach. He was a radical, a spitz Chabad, a spitz bocher. He wore a beard and a long coat, and he was learning Torah, and he was a member of the movement of the Malachim, which of course had a lot to do with Chassidishe Chabad, although it wasn't exactly Lubavitch. And the Rebbe was here, the Frierdiker Rebbe was here. And the Rebbe spotted him in a large crowd, and called him over and said to him, "Favos gehst du nicht mit kein tie? Why aren't you wearing a tie?" So he told the Rebbe, ties, moistris, gashmias, who needs it? Hula kapzen, five off the Welt, and so forth. So the Rebbe raised up his beard and said, "Guck, ich trage that tie. I'm wearing a tie." And a half a century later, this person was washing his car on the sidewalk to upset from a Yidden. And I say, unfortunately, we weren't upset because we didn't associate with him. What the story reveals is that there's a difference between extreme that is healthy and extreme that is polar, that is unhealthy, and consequently self-destructive. It ends in disaster. There is a most famous Hasidic story, which the previous Rebbe writes about in his letters. It's referred to in the Sichos. It's the story of the Chasidei Tolk, Tolker Chasidim. Tolk is Tov Lamed Kuf, which stands for the year 1770, 5,530. It was during the lifetime of the Maggid, the Holy Maggid of Mezrich. And of course, the Holy Maggid had a pyramid system. In contrast to the Holy Baal Shem Tov, who was involved directly with every follower, be they a big Godel, be Yisrael, or a Ish Poshut, the Holy Maggid was involved only with the Chavraya Kadisha, with the members of the Holy Society, with his inner circle. I heard once that the Polish Rebbes used to say that the Rebbe, the Holy Maggid of Mezrich, going the Rebbe from the Rebbes. He was involved only with Tzaddikim, which is true. And he expected each of them to gather a following around themselves where they lived and to create, in effect, a sub-Hasidic group. And that's really how the diversification of Hasidus really fully developed. The Holy Maggid had each one of his disciples do Hasidus in his place, in his way, and the various Hasidic flavors evolved from there. One of the most sensitive places to be involved in the dissemination of Hasidus was, of course, Russia. Because Russia was Lite, which was the bastion, which was the place of strength of the Mesnagdim, or the Oilamisha. All the Torah was there, and all the Gedula was there, and unfortunately much of the politics was there as well. So the Chassidishe Rebbe, or the disciples of the Maggid who opened up shop in Lite had to be very sensitive. And of course the famous names of the Litvish Rebbe's was Reb Mendel Haradoke and Rabbi Nagodl of Karlin. The Holy Barditchev is a little bit less well known. He also was in Pinsk for many years, and others, including of course the Alter Rebbe, who ended up being the Rebbe in all of Russia because all the others left, and it created an effect of vacuum, or almost all the others left. There were several who stayed. The Karliner, Stoller remained in Russia, and so forth. One of the Hasidic Rebbes, who was a disciple of the Maggid, that opened up a Hasidic branch in Russia was Avram Kaliski. His last name was Katz, K in Tzedek, and he was a very big Gaon, a big tzaddik, a tzaddik gomer, a charif, very sharp, and ish nilvav b'yoser, an incredibly passionate man. And he gathered a following of young men who were equally passionate, very learned, very scholarly, and very sharp. But they were not perfect tzaddikim. They were imperfect tzaddikim, or beinanim. And of course, in a perfect tzaddik, his passion, notwithstanding that it may be very demonstrative, is also holy passion. In an imperfect tzaddik and in a beinani and so forth, an imperfect passion is not always so pious, and it can have what we call in our culture a unique an ill side effect. And Avram Kalisker was not entirely sensitive to this. And he allowed his followers to be hyper Hasidim, to be extremists, to be radicals. And this hyper Hasidus, this radicalism, expressed itself, amongst other things, in an enormous amount of bittul ayesh. They would embarrass themselves and put themselves down. He describes they would walk around in the summertime in a winter coat on inside out, strolling the streets walking with a goat, which was of course demeaning, inappropriate for a scholar and a learned person and a rabbi and so on. And there was a lot of this hyper Hasidus, this extremism in their movement and in their culture. And it all came to a head one day when one of the followers of Avram Kalisker, who was a very scholarly person, a big Talmud Chacham, and very sharp, showed up in one of the most prominent Litvische towns, Minsk, let's say, or Shklov, and he presented himself as a Maggid, as a preacher. And as was the tradition in those days, a preacher came to town, they would test your level of learning, and accordingly they would give you accommodations. A bigger Talmud Chacham was given finer accommodations, and accordingly they would invite you to speak in one of the local shuls. The biggest Magidim would get to speak in the central shul, and the whole city would be invited. They would put him into a special room in the Hektish, they'd give him kavod malachim, they'd pay him nicely, and on. This young man shows up, he's a Magid, he has credentials. They talk to him in learning, a Goan. They bring him to the Rav, he makes an incredible impression, and they invite him to speak in the central shul, either was Shklov or Minsk, one of the biggest Eilamisha cities, Litvische cities, Snagdische towns. And he makes this very powerful speech. He was a great orator, and he enchanted the people. He put them almost into a trance. And at the end of his talk, he began to speak of the Vilner Gaon, the Gro, in a disrespectful way, and perhaps even worse than that. But the people had been so conditioned by his talk that they did not realize what he was saying. He finished the speech, walked off the stage, and ran for his life. Had they caught him, they literally would have lynched him. They would have killed him. Kipchute. The people chased him, they didn't get him, and this resulted in the asifa, in the meeting between the Kehillah of Shklov and Vilna, which brought about the first Chedim in Tafuf Lamed. 1770. The Mezritcher Maggid was upset beyond words. And he was focused on his Talmud, on Kalisker, his responsibility. You have students, you have disciples. You cannot let them run amok. You have to rein them in. They have to be normal, to be people, mention. And the end of the story was that Avram Kalisker came to Mezritch. He knew of the kped of his Rebbe, the Holy Maggid, and he was literally afraid to come into the town. And the Alter Rebbe and Mendel Vitebsker, who were his friends, fellow Litvische Rebbes, came to see him at the outskirts of Mezritch and talked to him, and they went to the Maggid and beseeched the Holy Maggid. They begged the Maggid to forgive him and to give him another chance, which the Maggid did. And only then was he able to come to town, and the Maggid met him, and the Maggid made him promise that he wouldn't be a Rebbe anymore. And there's a lot of history that followed. Later on, he criticized the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe told him, if anybody has to take advice from anybody, it should be you from me and not me from you. But this is called the story of the Tolkien Chassidim, the Chassidim of Tov Lamed, 1770, which brought about the Chanim against Chassidim, which was a terrible thing and had terrible effects, after effects. And the Chassidim used to say, Talak is nicht kein Tolk. Tolk is a Yiddish word spelled with a tes, which means order. Talak is nicht kein Tolk means the year Tov Lamed, the chaos of that year, is without order. It's chaotic. It's not good. Fast forward 100 and something years, you have almost an identical repetition of the same story. This story is brought in the Sefer, which has been published now, called Chasidim HaRishonim, about a chassid named Reb Chaim Ber Velensky. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, when I was a child, I heard that in Kremenchuk there's a chassid that every day before he davens, trinkt a glazel spirit. He drinks a bottle of spirit, which is the chassid Reb Chaim Ber. The story of Reb Chaim Ber was written by his son, based on a request of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it's published in this Sefer Chasidim HaRishonim, and there's a lot of details about his life. And to make a long story short, the story was as follows. There was a Gaon and a Chassid named Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin. Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin was a Gaon Olam, was a Gadol b'Yisrael, Amiti. And he was a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was the Kremenchuk Rov. Kremenchuk was a very, very big city. Thousands and thousands of Jewish families. Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin was a big enough man to encompass the whole town, which meant to say he acted as Rov. He was involved in every ma'aser in town, from the chinuch of the children, to the Chevra Kadisha, to the Bikur Chelim, to the helping women who had children, and on and on and on. He was so great a man that he was able to do the whole community single-handedly. And on top of that, he was also a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he oversaw the kibbutz of Chassidim in Kremenchuk. He was one of the three Rabbonim who sat on the Din Torah of the Tzemach Tzedek's sons after his histalkus. Him and the Peretz Chain and the Teres Chassid, Zalman Lublin, Schneur Zalman Fratkin of Lublin. He was a Gaon Olam Mamish. And he passed away suddenly and young. Tofresh Lamadalad, I believe. That would be 1834, almost 100 years later exactly. There's a whole long story how he was succeeded by his son-in-law, who was a younger manchik, he wasn't even 30 yet, by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Yael Rafalovich. And he was a Rav in Kremenchuk for maybe 60 years, a very, very long time. When he passed away, it was impossible for one man to fill his shoes. So many people filled his shoes. The Kremenchuk position was divided up, different people doing different things. And one of the many things that Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin had done was to be the mashpia and the rav and the madrich of Chassidim. And when he passed, this responsibility fell to the famous group that we know as the Kremenchuk Beralach, the Beralach of Kremenchuk. They were called Beralach of Kremenchuk because B'Hashgacha Pratis, coincidentally, they all had the word Ber in their name. There was a Chaim Ber, and there was several other Beralach, I forgot their names. The youngest of the Beralach was this Chassid of Chaim Ber Velensky that I mentioned before. And he took the responsibility of leading the kibbutz, the aid of Chassidim and Kremenchuk seriously. But he felt that as the junior Ber, he should have the minority role, that the others should lead. And it didn't work out that way. First of all, one of the Beralach passed away. I forgot the names, one of them passed away. And another one, who I believe his name was Moshe Ber, Masaya Ber, he undertook to lead the Chassidim of Kremenchuk, but he was a radical, he was an extremist. And his shita, his approach to rearing Chassidim was that if you wanted to be a Chabad Chassid, you had to be a complete lunatic, really. You had to be completely negligent of all responsibility. You couldn't take care of your wife, you couldn't take care of your children, you couldn't hold a job. He even encouraged the drinking of alcohol as a sign of your dedication to, strict avodah, strict chassidus. And it was very tragic. This great chassid of Moshe Ber Masayever created a movement of Lubavitcher Chassidim who were extreme, and many of them started out drinking mashke to be Hasidim and became full-blown alcoholics. Reb Chaim Ber Vilensky was absolutely destroyed by this, because he was a deep chassid, an incredible mind. I mean, you read the stories about how he learned. It seems to me like he knew Kol HaTorah Kula, but he was also a normal human being. And it was very upsetting to him that his friend had taken such an extreme approach to Hasidus, literally frightening so many people away from Hasidus and destroying the creme de la creme, the elite Hasidim of Kremenchuk. And very painfully, and after much thought, he opened another Beis Medrash. And it became Rabbi Moshe Ber's competition. And Rabbi Moshe Ber was very upset about it. Rabbi Moshe Ber felt that Rabbi Chaim Ber was undermining him, but Rabbi Chaim Ber felt that he had no choice. And he gathered, tikkun people, normal human beings. You can be a Lubavitcher Chassid, serve Hashem, daven, but live in the world, so to speak. And Rabbi Chaim Ber remained incredibly dedicated to his friend Rabbi Moshe Ber. He would always help him out, and people came to Rabbi Chaim Ber and asked him for things. His first request was, "What have you done lately for my friend Rabbi Moshe Ber?" Lord Rabbi Moshe Ber was behaving in such an erratic way and was also very upset at his old friend Rabbi Chaim Ber. And that's what happened. The Rebbe Rashab said once for Rabbi Chaim Ber, Tzchon gave him tikkun, which means that with his chassid Rabbi Chaim Ber, order was brought to Chassidus of Chabad of Kremenchuk, which is really how it's supposed to be. And the tragedy was that Rabbi Chaim Ber passed away young. He died young. And Rabbi Moshe Ber was still alive. He was older than him. And after Rabbi Chaim Ber died, Rabbi Moshe Ber admitted, and he said, "I should have died. He should have lived. As wollte gelebt, wollte es gewen atayeles." I forgot the exact expression, but the spirit was, if he would have lived, he would have helped people. And, I'm just an extremist. In other words, after his friend, who was younger than him, passed away, he sort of acknowledged the disorder and extreme of his movement. The Tzemach Tzedek commented, I'm sure you've all heard of the Rebbe of Kotzker, the Mendele Kotzker, who was they called him a Soraf. He was a holy man, a godly man, who had a movement of Talmidim who were themselves incredibly great. And of course, as we know of Chassidus Kotzk, the trademark of Kotzk was Midas HaEmes, the need for things to be absolutely true. And with no drop of phoniness is legendary, is famous. But the Kotzker Rebbe's Hanhoga was a very wilde Hanhoga. I heard from a Yid that the Kotzker was the Tzemach Tzedek's contemporary. They were the same age approximately. They passed away within years of one another. And the Kotzker Rebbe once commented about the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Mendel Lubavitcher, a ganze Woche, lernt und Shabbos hebt am Praven. In other words, all week long, the Tzemach Tzedek sat and learned. The Tzemach Tzedek was a masmid. Shabbos, he becomes a Rebbe. And he objected to this. He felt that the Tzemach Tzedek should have been busy with Ruchnius all week. But the Tzemach Tzedek said of the Kotzker, a Zayin Hanhoge is a Hanhoge from Farmat Teir. That the holy Kotzker Rebbe behaved as a tzaddik, but he lived like people lived before the Torah was given. Before the Torah was given, there was also tzaddikim. And there was also avodah. But it was polar. If you were in heaven, you had nothing to do with the earth. And if you were on earth, you had nothing to do with the heaven. And that's not the kavanah. That's not the way the Eibishter designed the world. The Eibishter designed the world that the world should be filled with godliness, which means that the world should be and be inspired with the presence of God and godliness. Order, tikkun, balance. That's not compromise. That's bringing together opposites into an order, into an integrated whole. The Rebbe Rashab once spoke of the Tanya. It's printed in the Torah Shalom. And he mentioned that the Tanya was written before Peterburg, before the Alter Rebbe was arrested and liberated. Yet it was written in the signet of Lachar Peterburg. It was written as though it had been written years later when Chassidus Chabad was fully grounded. So the Rebbe Rashab said, Eib chas v'sholem, if God forbid, and then he said, Memega of them sagen chas v'sholem, you permitted to say about this chas v'sholem. The Tanya wird geschrieben geworden in Tov Kuf Lamed Zayin. Tov Kuf Lamed Tes, and Tov Kuf Nun Tes, had it been written in the style of 1779, as opposed to the style of 1799, wollte es gebrennt Welt. It would have destroyed the world. Und das ist nicht der Kavanah. That's not the point. The point is that there should be a world. Hashem didn't create this world for chaos, He created it for order. I forgot where I heard this story, but I believe that the Alter Rebbe said when he was arrested, that they shouldn't let the Michal Apostel go to Peterburg, weil wird verbrennen in Peterburg. Und das ist nicht die Kavanah. If the Michal Apostel would go to Peterburg, he'd burn the city down, and that's not the purpose. Here's a Maamar about Avraham Avinu. And what the Maamar says about Avraham Avinu is Avraham Avinu by himself is a pole, is an extreme, and no good. Which is why, before the Jewish nation could be born, and before the seeds can be laid for the decomposition and rebirth of the Jewish people after their exile and their exodus from Egypt, we needed 3 patriarchs: Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, because each one of them alone represented, in the words of the Tzemach Tzedek, a seder from Farmat and Torah, an extreme, a polarity, a hyper point, which is for them ideal because they were perfect tzaddikim. But as the Welt sagt, "Se nicht a Welt." In that model, there's no world, and the Eibishter wanted that there should be a world, and that should be filled with balance in Yiddishkeit. You know, the Gemara Masechta Shabbos talks about Rashbi, how he came out of the cave and started destroying the world, and God said, "Go back into your cave. I didn't release you from the cave to destroy my world." And this Maamar argues that this is the case about Avraham in his way, and Yitzchak in his way, and only after you have the pole of Avraham and the pole of Yitzchak can you be followed by Yankov Avinu, who has balance. And as the Maamar will show you momentarily, that's why Avraham had a son Ishmael, and Yitzchak had a son Esau, because that's what happens when you have polarity. While Yankov Avinu is Mitas Shleima, his bed, his offspring are perfect because he had the balance. And only after you have Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov, can you begin the process of creating the nation which is going to receive the Torah from God Almighty at Har Sinai. So let's begin the Maamar. It's a pasuk in our Parsha, Lech Lecha. And the pasuk says, Anochei Magen Lach. The end of the pasuk is, I am your shield, and your reward is much. Right? Avraham was afraid that maybe after he had killed the 4 kings, perhaps he had forfeited his schar. No, don't worry about it. Anochei Magen Lach. You have plenty of reward still outstanding, and don't be afraid. Now, what is the simple translation of the word Anochei Magen Lach? I'm going to protect you. I'm your protector. Says the Alter Rebbe, Pirush Magen Avraham. The meaning of Anochei Magen Lach is the idea that we say in davening, Magen Avraham. Magen Avraham doesn't mean the shield that protects Avraham, but the shield of Avraham himself. Avraham needs a shield. Not he needs a shield to protect him from enemies. Avraham needs a shield, forgive me for putting it this way, to protect himself from himself. And we say it every day in davening. Baruch atah Hashem, Magen Avraham. That Avraham Avinu needs a shield. Why would Avraham need a shield? Because Avraham by himself is a seidef and lifnei matan teire is a pole. Let's read the Maamar. Dihine. Neither we know. I'm reading line 2 now. Shavraham u'bechinas chesed gadol ad mi'et. Avraham Avinu is a great kindness to the point of infinity. B'li shum meineh, because nothing holds it back. And from the perspective of Avraham Avinu, v'kulam tevim be'ein, of everything and everybody is good in his eyes. V'urak tevin is only good. He has no discrimination. He sees only good about Jews. The Welt sagt, Chassidim say, that there were 3 tzaddikim. The Rebbe Reb Zusha never saw anything bad about a Jew. The Rebbe Reb Lisa saw bad about a Jew and explained to God how wonderful it is. Or blamed it on God. Avraham, the Alter Rebbe, saw bad about a Jew and he taught him how to correct his ways, which is called tikkun. Avraham was a kind man. And in the person of Avraham, kindness was a nature. It was a personality. And because it was his nature and his personality, without avodah, without his struggles, that kindness was a fault. Because any midah, any attribute, even kindness, when taken to an extreme, can become destructive. Like children who want to play with destructive things, and you want to be a nice person, so you allow them. That's not kindness, that's destruction. Avraham's kindness was without discretion. He saw only good. And from his point of view, life should have been giving good to all, no matter what. And of course, you know the story with the Maggid, that the Alter Rebbe overheard 2 of his friends engaged in a discussion about what they would do if they were God. So one said, if I was God, I'd be kinder than God. Avraham's midah. And the other said, if I was God, I would be tougher than God. Yitzchak's midah. So the Alter Rebbe interjected and said, if I were God, I do exactly what God is doing, which is Yankov's midah. Which is why Avraham Avinu, his infinite kindness, said, line 3, Lu Yishmael Yechil Lefanecha, I wish Yishmael should live before you. In other words, Avraham was told by God Almighty that he's going to have a son, Yitzchak, Isaac, who's going to be the father of his nation. And Avraham answers, what's wrong with Yishmael? In other words, Avraham knew the deficiencies of Ishmael. And Avraham certainly knew what advantages his second son Yitzchak would have, but Avraham in his infinite kindness said, we'll compensate, we'll make it work, we'll see only the good in Ishmael, and Ishmael could be the perpetuator of my legacy, even if he's not perfect. And of course that wasn't the desired intent. Shepirushe, what does it mean that Yishmael should live before you? Sheyich yela ad lefanecha, he should live eternally in the presence of God. Shubachinas Ein Sof Bli Gavul, which is the idea of Ein Sof, which is infinite. Because when you talk about infinity, there's a level called Kachashecha Ka'eda. On the infinite levels of godliness, Keser, Sevav Kalaman, and specifically Chitanias HaKeser, there's a level of godliness that makes no discernment, that there's no way discriminating between Kedusha and Klipa, good and evil, because infinite kindness either sees no good in anything, or he sees good in everybody, including Klipa. Avraham knew full well who Yishmael was, nevertheless. Machmas chesed godel. Godel, look at his great kindness and his great goodness. He says to the Eibishter, why do you want to create another son and sideline this one? Let him live and be the father of my nation. Moreover, he wanted to give Ishmael kindness which has no restraint. Now what does kindness devolve into in Klipa? Permissiveness. You start out being kind and you end up being liberal. Liberal means everything is good. Open-ended, like some people say about some people. Some people are so open-minded their brains fall out of their head, which is not exactly an ideal thing. It's just unconditional. It has no parameters, it has no balance, it has no measure, and everything needs a framework. And Avraham's kindness would have resulted in being kind to Yishmael also, and it would have been a terrible end. Which is why it says in Medrash, Lech Avraham Shatzamenu Yishmael, we are not following Avraham Avinu, out of whom came Yishmael. Because v'yatsa machmas reiv chaste, Avraham's unconditional kindness, Avraham's not discriminating kindness, created a Yishmael. And of course, in Yiddishkeit, you need to have not only the extreme of chesed of Yishmael. Continues the Rebbe on line 6, Avram was wrong. It's inappropriate. Why? Mashiach is going to come, because the Torah tells us, death is going to be swallowed up. Moreover, God Almighty says, I'm going to remove this slightest trace, whatever is left over from the spirit of uncleanness from the world. And of course, the idea is, in order for things to live together forever, you must remove the slightest measure of klipa imperfection, because death has to do with the smallest flaw. And when Mashiach is going to come, death is going to stop, because there'll be no evil in the world, and that's only possible if it's tzarech levayed kol haram min ha'aretz. Evil has to be eradicated. Now, removing evil is not comfortable, and of course, removing evil is complicated. The shalosh klipas at meis lagami have to be destroyed, and automatically the klipas neg is elevated, like it says in Tanya chapter 37. But the Eibishter has a purpose. And for the Eibishter's purpose to be realized, you can't just be kind. You have to have that balance. The world to be governed by pure kindness. The world will never reach the stage of Mashiach Tzedkenu, which is that there's no more evil, because the evil has been eradicated. In other words, using dinim and gevuras to create order and balance in the Eibishter's world. Which is why after Avraham Avinu comes Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is the other pole, judgment, discrimination, but to an extreme. So Avraham without Yitzchak would have been runaway kindness, which would result in Yishmael and Plishtim. Yitzchak without Avraham would be Esau, like it says in Zayar that the head of Esau lies at the feet of Yitzchak. So you have Maamar Chassidishe, you have it in Nayim Beis, you have it in Tashin Vov, that the Gevura of Kedusha, which means to be very exact in Avodas Hashem, evolves or devolves into Gvuras Kashis, Achzarias, cruelty. Because Yitzchak, like Avraham, was, quote, a Seder from Lifnei Matan Torah, an order before the Torah was given, which is polar, which is extreme. In other words, in the language of Asher Batumir, Nishtaka Welt, which is not what Eibishter wants. Va'af Yitzchak as well, Yatzal Mimenu Esau, produces an Esau, Machmas Dinei HaKosha, because of his severe judgment. And the Maimonides Chassidus explain how Esau forms. First, you're very, very, very passionate about the Eibishter. And then you're very, very exacting from other people. And then you enjoy criticizing other people. And then you enjoy finding fault in other people. And it devolves until you push it to enjoy watching people suffer. And this evolution has to do with the polar tendency of Yitzchak, pure Gvuras. And you have to have balance. As the Pasuk says, V'alcha b'chatichta. Yichya. Esau lives by his sword. In other words, his bloodlust. That's a de-evolution. That's a descent from Yitzchak's Gvuras, because they're extreme. And the Maimon finishes, Yankov Avinu's bed was whole. Yankov didn't have any children who were fallouts, because Yankov had balance between Chesed and Gevurah. This is no good by itself. This is no good by itself. You have to have balance. Chesed alone is overflowing kindness. Gevurah alone is overflowing strength. Yankov creates that balance. And only after we have all three of us can you begin the process of creating the Jewish nation. Let me elaborate just a bit on this idea. Look at Torah. We have 613 mitzvahs. If you were to examine the 613 mitzvahs, the following truth would emerge. I think this is an undeniable truth. At every point in our history, every one of the mitzvahs in the Torah was thought to be brilliant. Each mitzvah had a time and place where people thought it was incredibly incisive and anticipating and visionary and so forth. But you know what else? There's also been a time in our history where the very same mitzvahs were viewed as being racist and angry and violent and negative and so forth. It's a fact. Right? Every mitzvah in the Torah has had an opportunity to exist in a civilization that thought it brilliant, and many mitzvahs in the Torah, at least, have found themselves criticized because there was a civilization that saw them as either being too liberal or too discriminating and judging and extreme and so forth. Now, why is this? It's very, very simple. Torah comes from God. What's the difference between God and man? The difference is man has a personality, a nature. And man's nature is leaning towards polarity. People who have kindness in their nature tend to be too kind. Look at the civilization in which we're living. America is a very kind nation, but it's become permissive to the point, literally or virtually, of Rahman al-Islam, the whole civilization falling to pieces. The moral fiber is tragically eroded, all because people want to be nice and leave one another alone. What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it is there has to be balance. Kindness without strength is self-destruction. Just like strength without kindness is Hitler. Kindness without strength is a liberalism that has no bounds. Everything is permitted as long as you don't hurt anybody else. And Rahman al-Islam, the civilization sinks into the level of animalism. And as Rambam writes when he discusses the Taimei mitzvahs, that liberalism ends up creating jealousy. Because everybody can do anything they want, at any time, in any place, with any person. And it creates jealousy. And the jealousy creates animus. And the animus results in violence ultimately. In other words, too much liberalism will bring to gvura, to violence. Like the Alter Rebbe describes Napoleon. People call Napoleon a Democrat and a liberal. The Alter Rebbe says he has bloodlust. He loves to see blood spilled. So, the reason every mitzvah in Torah has at one point in time been celebrated is because over the course of history, various midas, various emotional tendencies pervaded. There were times in history, places in history, where the civilization was very, very gvuradik. So they loved all the laws about, if you do this, there's this punishment, you're not allowed to do that, now do that. But they didn't like the vasis hayasher v'atoiv, the lefnei mishur sadin, and the kaifer al midas daim, the kindness and the benevolence and the forgiveness and the compromise aspect of Torah were very disturbing to them. On the other side of the coin, those civilizations that were especially liberal had problems with the judgmentalism of Torah. This is a sin, and this is wrong, and this lifestyle is not acceptable, and so forth. What's the answer? The answer is Torah is Tiferes. Torah is the truth. And the truth is, kindness alone is self-destructive, severity alone is certainly self-destructive. It is balance, and that the balance must be maintained throughout. You don't say, well, now we're living in a liberal society, let's be liberal Jews. Now we're living in a conservative society, let's be conservative Jews. We're Jews, so we learn Torah and do mitzvahs and understand that there's whatever integrity there is in liberalism comes from Torah. And whatever integrity comes from conservatism and exactness comes from Torah, and we have to walk the middle. And of course, ultimately, in teaching Goyim, that's what we're teaching them, this balance. So as great as Avraham Avinu was, because there was a Seder from Lifnei Matan Torah, Avraham's kindness led to a Ishmael, and Yitzchak's Gevura to an Esau. And the Rebbe continues, V'hinei. Naida, we all know, he's moving on to another point. Ki Magen, what is a shield? It's Nikra Dover HaMachasa. A shield is something that covers over, that protects. Moshe, for example, V'cham in a state of war, Nikra Magen, what is a shield? Masha Machasa. People used to go into battle holding these huge shields with their left hand, they would protect them from weapons. That arrows and the bow shouldn't penetrate the defensive lines. Chas v'shalom, dispatch a person. So the shield is a protection. It covers. And of course, our Maimon teaches us that Avraham Avinu has a shield. Magen Avraham Anochei Magen Lech. V'hinei. Ksiv the Torah says, Kishem Mesha Magen Havaya Lekim. That in God's design of creation, He employs Havaya, which means Ein Sof, and simultaneously Elikim, which means the godliness, which is the source of limitation. And he says, just like the physical sun. If there was no shield around it, the light would be too powerful, too potent, and it would destroy the world. And the shield around the light of the sun, it shields. Should be able to take it. The sun's light would be too bright if not for the fact that around it was a shield. So was the shield giving us light or holding light back? And of course the answer is that by holding light back, he's making light constructive. Which is why the Chazal tell us that when Mashiach comes, the Kadosh Baruch Hu removes the sun from its shield, because then we'll be in a position to receive all those rays. And tzaddikim is hanimba, the righteous are rewarded from it, have pleasure from it, or the shayim nideinimba, the evil are punished. So when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to tolerate more revelation and receive it inwardly. Now, too much sunlight, too much chesed, the Eibush, there is no good, you have to have a shield. So the Maamar is teaching us something very, very counterintuitive, and that is, in Yiddish, zu teig nicht, zu frum, zu klug, zu gut, zu schein, zu hoich. Anything to an extreme is no good. And even Avraham Avinu is extreme toyoichet nicht. And that's Magen Avraham, to protect Avraham, so to speak, from his own extremism. And the Rabbi explains it in practical terms. What would be a model illusion? How would you illustrate this idea that too much of a good thing is no good in our practical lives? He brings a gewaldige example. It's known. Avraham every morning, which is the morning associated with Avraham. Avraham is associated with the morning. I'm sorry. Yitzchak with the afternoon and Yankov with the night. And what happens in the mornings? There is a kindness is Meseder Be'elam was aroused in the world. Like it says in the Pasuk V'yashkim Avraham Babekir. Avraham got up in the morning, and it says in Kabbalah Sfarim that the Avraham getting up in the morning is an allusion to the fact that every morning there's a Gilui of Lev and Helen. I've told you the story before that the Rebbe once met Rabbi Gringlas Al Vashalom, was a Chanin Levracha, was a Makubal in the street, and the Rebbe tells him V'yashkim Lovin Babekir. So he got all excited that the Rebbe was telling him there's a Shaychas to the Madreg of Lev and Helen. This means in practical terms, every morning God is kind. How does the kindness manifest? That Hashem shines down upon us a very, very, very high light. A light, as in our culture we would say, from completely above Seder Ishtalshalos. As a consequence of this incredible light, Jews are aroused to tshuva and to serving Hashem completely without premeditation. It's an inspiration that Hashem gives. But of course, as we know from Chassidus, easy come, easy go. Okay, the Esau, says, if Hashem would have it His way, He would nourish the world from kindness alone. But if Hashem would nourish the world from kindness alone, as we just described, the world would not have any existence. And therefore, but it doesn't happen that way. Hashem doesn't just give unconditional kindness. In reality, Hashem also has an element of gevurah, of contraction. To contract, to contain His kindness and goodness. V'la says to create a road. That this road is going to condense, to contain, to limit, and to focus the flow of godliness from heaven to earth, which should be constructive. And one of the benefits of this order is that the amount of vitality and life Hashem brings to the lowest world should be only what is necessary for the sustenance of klipas and not more. Because klipa could access kedusha and receive indefinitely, infinitely. And you want to sustain klipa, but you want to sustain klipa in a very measured way. And therefore, the infinite kindness of Avraham, though it's a good thing on the surface, is not a constructive thing. For the sake of holiness, in other words, in as much as the purpose of Hashem is concerned. That darkness shouldn't be just washed away by light, which be transformed from darkness itself into light. And if in order for this to happen, you have to have discrimination, and you can't have unconditional kindness. If there wouldn't be a road that limits and contracts how chayis comes from heaven to earth, even klipa would have an infinite amount of vitality, and the evil would never go away. There's an expression in the Welt, I think it's a Rambam, when you're kind to the cruel, you're being cruel to the kind. When your kindness has no bounds and no constraints, it's the opposite of kindness, absolutely. And let me explain this to you, yeah? I'm going to give you my own understanding. The person wakes up in the morning, for a split second, they have a clarity that says, I want to jump out of bed and serve Hashem, and I don't want to lay. If they take advantage of that, their day begins like the Mendel was like a lion. If we hit snooze and go back to sleep, so then the morning can start nicht wie Leib, wie fed. But every morning we have this great inspiration. How would you explain that in practical terms? I'll give you a very simple example. I'm sure you've learned the Sicha in Yonah Shel Teres and Chassidus, on the essence of Chassidus, which talks about what Chassidus is. Chassidus is Yechida. And of course, a significant portion of that Sicha talks about Moedani. Why? Because the Rebbe wishes to explain Moedani on all four levels of Pshat, Remez, Drush, Tzod, and then the Chassidus of each one of those four levels, and so forth and so on. What does Chassidus say about Moedani? Moedani, a Jew says in bed, with dirty hands, not properly covered, before Negel Vaser, where you're not allowed to say a name of God, and he's talking to God, because Kol atum shabe'elam kenish mitamazan Moedani v'nayidin. A Jew's Moedani is uncorruptible. It's so pure, it's so absolute, it's so simple, that it's pure and godly no matter what. In other words, Moedani, you say in bed, because the level of Moedani is such that you could meet God without any preparedness whatsoever. In other words, in a way, Moedani is the simplest and highest meeting between man and God. Let me ask you a dumb question. So what do? You say Moedani, you wash Negavasa, and you get out of bed. Why not stay in bed? No, you got to go daven. And davening is a ladder that you're climbing from step to step. But no point in the ladder of davening do you reach the same level as the Moedani, in its simplicity and in its plainness. So to be very direct, why get out of bed? A person wakes up in the morning. At that moment, he relates to God like his friend. He talks to him like another person. The intimacy is real. Why get out of bed and ruin it with the formality of prayer? And the answer is plain. That experience of simple connectedness to Hashem, of Moedani, is only special because you experience it once a day in the morning. If you experience it all day long, it will become very, very stale and become most meaningless. So you start off with Moedani, which is the highest point of the day. Then you're told, get out of bed. and do what we call avodah pnimis, internalize your connectedness to godliness, you're stepping down. You're going from a higher level to a lower level, but you're, as they say in our culture, bringing it into vessels. And the Rebbe concludes, "V'lachein, therefore, b'chol boker every morning, the morning is the time of kindness, which is the attribute of Chesed and Avraham. Like I said before, Yitzchak is Mincha and Yankov is Meidev. Anu tzrichim levarech. What blessing do we say? Birchas Magen Avraham, the blessing of shielding Avraham. What are you shielding Avraham against? Himself. That Avraham's kindness should not be overflowing and become destructive. What does it mean? Magen, to shield. Sheyase Magen lebechinas Avraham. Hashem should create a shield for the attribute of Avraham. Farvas hana l'teivaseinu, for our benefit. The Avraham being reined in, so to speak, being contained, there's a possibility for us to be able to benefit from Avraham Avinu. So the Maamar teaches us a wonderful lesson, just like in medicine. Yeah, a person has an illness, you give him a medication. So why not give him more? And the answer is you'll upset other limbs. A person needs a certain kind of a treatment. So why not give him more? And the answer is to create other problems. It's all about balance. Too much of anything is no good, even the best thing in the world. And in Avodah Sa'adim, it's the same way. And therefore, Magen Avraham means the Eibush is protecting Avraham Avinu from bringing destruction to himself and to us, because Avraham's chesed is by itself infinite and plain and doesn't have that balance.